Today's episode is sponsored by Branding Iron Advertising, Marketing, and Public Relations. Since 2007, Branding Iron has been helping to bring awareness to the mission of volunteer firefighters. You can learn more by visiting their website, brandingiron.com. Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of the Situational Awareness Matters radio show. I'm your host, Rich Gassaway. The purpose of this show is to improve situational awareness and decision-making for individuals and teams who work in high-risk, high-consequence environments. The SA Matters mission is simple: to help you see the bad things coming in time to avoid bad outcomes. On this episode, I interview Dave Casey, director of the Louisiana State Fire and Emergency Training Institute, on the need for realistic first responder training. During the interview, Dave shared the need to turn off PowerPoint and get out of the classroom and into the field for hands-on training. I can almost hear some of the people cheering with that one. Some of the challenges associated with electronic training, the benefits of demonstrating skills during scenario-based evolutions, the need to perform high-fidelity training combining all the practical skills together in a complete practice scenario, the use of task books to track skill development, and the challenges with creating realism with gas-fired firefighting props. So let's listen in on my interview with Dave Casey. We're coming to you today from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I am attending the Louisiana State Firemen's Convention, and I presented on the topic of situational awareness. Here I had the opportunity to meet up with Dave Casey. Dave is the director of the Louisiana State Fire and Emergency Training Institute, and he's the co-author of Fire Engineering's DVD series, The Right Seat, Company Officer Development Beyond the Textbook, and Jones and Bartlett's Live Fire Training Principles and Practice. Today we're going to be talking about the need for realistic training. Dave, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Rich. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
And I appreciate the gift of your time to sit down with me here at the conference. I know you got a lot of things on the agenda. You've been attending a lot of meetings, and you got a lot of people here that you have to get connected with, so the time that you're giving to us is really important to me. So our topic that we've chosen is the need for realistic training. What's the issue with realistic training? I mean, isn't everybody out there training realistically? Why would this be our topic?
You know, you see out there so much of the training going on today involving a projector and a PowerPoint, and having troops in the chairs watching a PowerPoint isn't learning, it's watching. And I tell our people, our instructors, and the classes where we have with fire department training personnel, don't tell, go do. Get out of the classroom, get on the drill field. PowerPoint for a few minutes for a quick orientation on, be it how we're going to do things today, or terminology, or at least so people can see a quick video or whatever of what they're going to do and put it into some context. All that's great. That's really important. But if that's what your drill is, it's not a drill.
Okay. So you're saying that realistic means get out of the classroom and out where it's happening. Is that the essence of realistic?
Very much so. I mean, it's one of the things that will admittedly annoy me is you see a group spending, in Firefighter 1 or 2, hours in a classroom going over ladders. And you use any of the principal companies' PowerPoints that come with the books, and you literally have hours of material. And that's hours that people don't have the ladders in their hands, that they're not throwing them up against the wall, that they're not going through windows, that they're not practicing getting on a roof, or whatever technique you're trying to do at that point. And I think we have to really shift the paradigm we've found ourselves in now of electronic learning and really concentrate on going out and actually doing it.
You know, it's interesting. You just struck a nerve for me, because as I've had the chance to talk with a lot of firefighters, it seems that there appears to be, in some organizations, a shift to doing more online training as a means of being easy, quick, inexpensive, They can do it. They can get their their checkbox. We did the ladder drill, even though it was online. And what you're saying is that's not going to cut it, right?
A lot of times it's just not going to do it. I mean, LSU has a online associate's degree, and I'm not a tremendous fan of online only, but good programs are out there that are online where you have what PowerPoint you would see in a classroom. Okay, you're seeing it on a computer instead, but you still have that interpersonal contact. You still have that go out and do things. One of the things that we're working on now is we're going to have a blended learning Fire Officer 1 program. And I really think it's going to be a stronger program than a lot of the just pure online, and even stronger than some of the pure classroom traditionally delivered programs that go Monday through Friday. You know how it is. Monday through Friday, they're throwing a lot of stuff at you, and it doesn't all stick that quick. We're taking it, spreading it out. There's live video components. There's online components where you're working with pre-produced materials. We have some that's going to be specific to Louisiana, but it's still, it's the national standard, and it follows, of course, the NFPA standards and one of the publishers' material. And what's so nice on this is, as they go through, they have to work with somebody in their department that is their training bureau's designee to work on their task books. We can't teach them how their department does certain things. We can teach them generalities. Really, it's more important for them to know how they are supposed to do it when they go home. So this really shifts it from the general material to my department. When I go home, this is what is expected of me. So they'll work on the task books. They'll work with a pod. They gather together halfway through with one of our instructors. Small group, very small group. I mean, they'll be around a table. It won't even be a big table. And go over different aspects of what they've learned in a fairly formal setting, but it gives them the opportunities to show what they know. Be it how to teach their company, how to do a pre-plan, any of the Fire Officer 1 skills. But it's live, it's right there, and they're going to do it for real with a few others there. And I think it's going to be such a strong way of doing this. Then they'll go back to some more online over a few more weeks. They'll come back in. The practical evolutions that they're going to be doing as their final project is also their final exam. I mean, this meets all the academic requirements, it meets all the credentialing requirements, and you're actually winding up with a pretty strong student this way, because they haven't just tried to do the book learning in a really short burst. So we have high hopes for this. We're looking at doing this really in the new calendar year, early into it. And, that's just for company officer. But if I could, I'd like to shift back to the firefighter skills.
Sure.
Ed Harden, our friend Ed, uses the term high fidelity training. And his point, which is so good, is the training has to be realistic. It has to put you into the context of how you will use that information when you need it. And this can be as complicated as catching a hydrant, throwing a ladder, stretching a pre-connect, using a thermal imager, onwards and onwards. And an issue I see with so many recruit schools, and obviously I've come from Louisiana, from another state. I was Florida State Training Director for years. Before that, I worked at another fire academy as an instructor for years when I was growing up in the fire service, for lack of a better term. Coming up through the ranks, I taught at Broward Fire Academy in Fort Lauderdale for a long time and did the recruit training primarily in some other programs. In initial training, sure, you want to be slow, careful, safe, make sure they get the skills of throw at the ladder, pulling a hose line. But where I see so many programs go wrong and losing that high fidelity that Ed pushes for is they don't do it together. They don't do it in the context of an emergency scene. Okay? Pull hose, pack hose. Pull hose, pack hose. Go do ladders. But we know, for real, we may have to do a vent enter search, throw a ladder, take a line up, take it in through the window, and we don't really train it in that context. And that's another really just important aspect, is when you're doing the training, If it's a practical skill, go do it practically. If it's something that they can get out of PowerPoint for the orientation, good. Save some time, discussions, no problem there. But once they get the actual skills, then you have to put those skills in the context of how you got to use it. And that's the practice emergency calls, where you're laying lines, throwing ladders. The other night we did a drill, and it's pretty funny. The recruits figured out we had something going on. And, a little bit too many whispered conversations, maybe some movement during the day, maybe a couple too many instructors around. So they kind of figured out something was going to happen, and they were going to get a surprise. So we wound up waiting until 9:30. And most of them had racked out. And believe it or not, some of our instructors snuck in the back way through the soybean fields, and so didn't see him coming. Blacked out pickup truck. This is fire department black ops. And they went in, woke them up, and we had a simulated structure. Students had been, before anyone says anything, students had been through the buildings before. They knew the emergency plans. They knew the emergency egress. They knew. Actually, had been in the building enough, they knew the building pretty well. But they got to pull up, lay lines, there was a fire, they had to stretch pre-connects into there, they had to do a search. Of course, there was a victim in there. Of course, it wasn't easy to find, back behind a piece of furniture type thing. And they got to put it into that context, though. And the students even were emphasized tremendously. That was probably the most valuable session that they had had. Even though we'd done some others in the context, but this was in the dark, unexpected, right now type things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I want to back up for just a second. As you mentioned the task book early on. What's the task book?
Task books were brought to us by forestry, and it's become very ingrained in the fire service now, as it should be. And it's just a matter of keeping track of the skills that are, be it the NFPA set or a more local set, that the person has met the knowledge requirements, that they have the skills that they need, and that they're actually able to do everything. It goes back to the KSAs. And we use those. And of course, we're not alone. That's a pretty much national program. At least most of the state training directors I talk to are all using them, especially for the outreach programs.
Okay.
And when I came into fire service as a volunteer firefighter in 1976, our volunteer department had a program called PQS. It was stolen directly from the Navy. Our training officer was an ex-Navy NCO. And the PQS is, again, very simply, it's got all of the skills you need to be able to do, the knowledge you need to know, and you're required to demonstrate it in more than a paper pencil test. You have to actually show you know how to do that. And our old department was you had to show them twice, because if you got it right the first time, they wanted to make sure it wasn't an accident.
Yeah, right.
So, and that still works there, and I think that's something I'm going to try to push here. We have a lot of rural departments, and I think we have the ability to do that, because it's hard when you bring in a new volunteer. And when you bring in one, it is hard to set up training.
Yeah.
And if we can set them into something that's organized, that we have several of their people that are trained to teach that program, you do it basically one-on-one. And we have the online resources that they can use. If they want to show a video on catching a hydrant, they just click on our website and do it. They can do it right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to be a real help for not just the really rural departments, but just really when you pick up a small amount of people. I mean, it's easy when you pick up 10 people at once, or if you only pick up people twice a year or 3 times a year, then it's a lot easier to organize training. But to get somebody on board and then hold them off from training for a few months, you're going to lose them.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to really hook them while they have that initial interest, and we can get them started right away at the local level. And that's not something we have in place right now. That was taken from Plantation Fire Department down in Florida, and that's where I started off as a volunteer. And they've had it for years and years and years, and it's been a good, strong program.
Mm-hmm. What would be your advice to a department that says, well, we don't have a training facility, we don't have a burn building, we don't have training grounds? What can they do to make their training realistic when they don't have access to, a state fire training center or even a regional fire training center? What can they do to make their training realistic?
Here in our state, we have 2 campuses to our State Fire Academy. One in Baton Rouge, the other one near Minden, and that's up toward Shreveport. It's quite a distance between them, and that leaves a lot of areas that have a very long reach to try to get to one of the state facilities. A lot of them have some regionals, a lot of them don't. And there's a lot of things you can do. In our state, we have mobile props that will bring out Class A burn, flashover. We're adding car props, mazes. We have a maze. We have a survival trailer. And when you can hook up with other fire departments that have some of those resources that might be able to bring them to you on some sort of arrangements, that's a great thing. And there's just a lot of things you can do very inexpensively. You can go get a shipping container, and you don't have to make it into a burn building. If you do, you got to be very careful how you do it. But if you just cut a couple windows in and a door or two, all of a sudden you've got a lot of things you can do on drill night. You can do smoke drills. You can do ladder evolutions. You can do bailouts. You can do vent enter search, albeit on a first floor. But you know what? You have to do vent enter search on a first floor. A lot of people kind of lose that little focus that, this happens on one-story houses. So there's a ton of things you can do like that. There's a couple things on the fire engineering website right now. Department out west had come up with some really innovative maze props. But what's so nice is they're interchangeable. You rearrange them. They're not in a truck. They're transported by truck if you need to go somewhere. But you can rearrange them. When you're not using them, they stack and store. You've got a couple different projects out there on different websites where you can have mazes that fold up and collapse. We had built something where I was first a paid firefighter in Sunrise. It was just 2 L's of plywood, 8 foot by 4 feet, very easy. 2x4s, just rip the plywood to cover it, and in the bays you could set that up. I couldn't even tell you how many different ways, just to make a hallway, to make a T, to make different search patterns, using some of the walls that are there and different things. And those you just, a couple screws, put them away, and they fold up next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different things. A lot of good websites, a lot of good resources that a department interested in doing some training that doesn't have a tower, doesn't have a big budget. There's a ton of good things that can be done out there.
Okay. What else does the listener need to know about how to make their training realistic?
Well, I see a couple things out there, and there's a couple nice fire department posters you can download. I found a couple on Pinit and a couple of other sites that have the "Don't practice until you can get it right, practice until you can't get it wrong." But it has a really important quote to mess up.
Say it again.
I'm going to. Don't practice until you get it right, practice until you can't get it wrong. And that's just such a, it's almost a platitude, but it's so important. And a problem I've been seeing is with the live fire training props. And obviously I wrote the book on it, and I'm from a state that's in Florida is very regulated how they do it. I helped put together the ISFSI credential course, which if your state doesn't have a live fire credential course, that's the one you got to be in. You need to track that down. I haven't been teaching it lately, but I did teach the initial courses for the folks that are teaching it. And it's just such a good program. But what I've seen so often with the gas props, and I don't want all the gas companies getting mad at me here because some of them are really good, it's not the prop, it's how you use it. And Dominic Coletti brought up something a while back, and it really hit home that if you practice on some of these gas props where you can get right on top of the prop, it's just not that hot, or the visibility is good, that you're not learning the shielding, you're not learning that your hose can throw a good distance. There's no reason to wait until you're on top of it. You can open up from a distance and start knocking down fire and cooling your environment. And a lot of the props are such that they don't want you to hit it with too much water. I mean, some of them are really pretty resilient on it, and some of them will react with the water and roll more fire back like it would be like it would. But you tend to be able to get much closer, and you have to train the people to operate like for real. And don't blame the prop, blame the instructors. And you find this in the Class A props too. A little bit less, but also on the Class A props you'll see, just use a little bit of water. Don't put it out for the next crew. And the people aren't leaving ready. That's the big debate with the acquired structures. I like acquired structures. I've always had good luck with that. The realism isn't there on a lot of the permanent but much safer props, and it becomes a balancing act. And with the 1403 standard, you have to be very careful, because some of the things right now in 1403, it doesn't differentiate a Class A fueled prop and an acquired structure for water flow. Well, it is a big difference. They do on gas props, by the way. That's last time that got changed, and hopefully this one will get changed this time. But where you get limited to a point of what you can burn, how you can burn, where you can burn, that the instructor can't just throw their hands up in the air and say, well, the standard's killing it. You have to understand the standard. You have to learn how to operate in that environment to make the realism there, because you still can under that standard. But it takes a bit more work. Mm-hmm. It takes a little bit more imagination, a little bit more creativity. We were in our new burn prop the other day, which is Class A prop, all instructors, and we were playing with it, trying to get that magic balance of ventilation versus flame interface, and we didn't quite get there on the first try. We're going to go back and play with it a bit more. I think we have to put some more ventilation in there and rearrange it a little bit. But we're trying to make a realistic environment. When we come in, there's heavy smoke, heavy heat, a good amount of fire, very realistic. And it takes effort, but it's so worth it, because you don't want a person coming out of fire school all proud, happy with their certificate, maybe their IFSAC or Pro Board sticker on their state certificate, and first fire they go to, it's nothing like what they had in training. And we're just doing them a disservice if we don't have it ready for them like that.
We're going to take a brief break from our interview with Dave Casey so that I can share with you how you can locate a situational awareness matter tour stop near you. Or if you're unable to locate a tour stop near you, how you can still learn valuable situational awareness lessons through the online academy. If you're interested in attending a live event, you can check out the Situational Awareness Matters tour stop schedule at samatters.com. Click on the Program and Keynotes tab below the header, then click on the Events Schedule tab. If I'm in your area, I hope you'll consider attending a live event. If you're not able to attend a live event, consider signing up for the SA Matters Online Academy. The Academy contains videos and articles that cover the same content as the 3-day live tour event, delivered in 14 modules that you can go through at your own pace from your own computer. The Academy Plus version includes 4 books that are referenced throughout the Academy. The Plus version is a great bargain because the tuition simply covers the costs of the books, making the Academy free. Just click on the link below the header on the SA Matters homepage titled Online Academy. Okay, let's resume our interview with Dave Casey, Director of the Louisiana State Fire and Emergency Training Institute, on the topic of realistic training.
Back in the day, when we burned with acquired structures, we could do a lot of things that we can't do today. I had instructors who made sure that what we did in acquired structures was going to be as realistic as possible to the real thing. You know, we had furniture in it. We burned the furniture. We burned fuels that were hydrocarbons and created the black smoke, and for a lot of reasons that that wasn't necessarily the safest things to be doing. And there were, back in the day, a lot of injuries from training like that. But what would you say to the people who say, well, 1403 has killed realistic fire training? The smoke isn't. It's all a generic type of smoke. We can't generate the heat. We can't get people to really feel what real firefighting is like. What would you say to those folks?
There's some legitimacy to what they're saying, and it's that scale that you're trying to balance between training safety and preparedness of the candidates. And my own opinion is I think we're almost leaning so far on safety that we're not preparing the students the way they need to be prepared.
And that's what I hear a lot.
And there's a lot of reality to it. If you look at the Europeans, they train very, very differently than we do. And it's, to a point of, you look at our standards, what do we spend on fire behavior? Part of a morning. And you go overseas and they spend over 40 hours on it, doing all these demonstrations. They do the labs. You get to see how the fire behavior is. It's great, the studies that NIST and you all are doing now. It's really quantifying a lot of information, but a lot of it's been taught in Europe for years and in a very visual and practical sense in a lot of their academies. Don't take me wrong, the guys are doing a great job here, and it's so important to make people see the information, because a lot of it's been out there. Any big city truckie could tell you, you watch the door, watch the airflow.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a new thing. But quantifying that instead of just being told by the senior fire guy, boy, that makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
That's night and day.
Do you have some examples for realistic training that isn't structural fire type incidents that we could talk about for realism? Be it wildland or EMS, or I don't know if that's the area. I know you wrote the book on live fire training, so I don't know if those other areas, if you have some tips or pointers for realism off of structure fires.
Sure. And again, part of the props that you use, a lot of the gas prop car fires and such like that, you see the people getting right up on top of it, and Brother Bill Gustin pounds it on anybody he can get to. Your hose has a good reach. That's the point you start flowing water. Mm-hmm. When it first reaches the car at full flow, that's where you start. Because when things start flinging off that car, you're 30 feet further away.
Mm-hmm.
You're still not out of the danger zone, but you're a whole lot further away. And all of the smoke and everything that we now know how many bad gases are in there, and now there's another new specter out there of particulate in the paint that adheres to things like respiratory tracts and such after it cools off from the thermal column. So you may be in apparently clear area and it's sprinkling down on you. Well, if you're 30 feet away or better to start with, you're all that much better off. Again, we got to train like we need to use it. Some of the EMS simulations, we're a paramedic training center, and some of the simulation mannequins now are just absolutely scary. From when I realized,
scary good,
and I realized I'm a dinosaur, and yes, I did actually ride in the back of Cadillac ambulances. They weren't that awful old. But they were reserve units. So, we had vans for the primaries. It wasn't quite like horse-drawn. But we did have Life Pack 3s. And they were new and modern. But, one of the best training things is the simulation. If you can't afford the $50,000, $100,000 mannequin, we have an awful lot of firefighter and paramedics that are great amateur thespians that can simulate chest pains, be real pains in the posterior for the medic students, and you can do just a huge amount of just great eliciting the correct information, go through the steps, they'll tell you the vitals. All of that's great. We're even doing that with our recruit class, where we have not only the structure fires, we have smells and bells, we have EMS calls, and that just helps them put it into that context so much better. Some of the simulation equipment that we've seen, the online ones, and there's one out now that you can even use on your smartphone, which is just amazing, that it's not totally enveloping. You're not in heat, smoke, or whatever, but you're still getting the visual cues. You're still reacting to those visual cues like you would in reality, and you can build some just amazing scenarios that, be it inside the car. I mean, I remember at Sunrise 25 years ago, we used to do simulations with bed sheets and the sandbox on the overhead projector.
Yeah. Right after we went from horse drawing, we moved into the sandbox. And the young folks would be like, what? Sandbox, what? The older folks would be laughing.
Well, in your class today, you're talking about using, what was the term you used today? You said none of the younger people recognize what you were talking about.
Oh, talking about the Etch-a-Sketch.
The Etch-a-Sketch.
Yeah.
Well, I was giving a class on rapid decision-making recently, and I used Klein's rapid decision-making matrix, which uses the slide tray.
Yeah.
And I had to pull one out, lift it up, and I said, okay, class of 30, how many people know what this is? The older folks did, but the line seemed to be right about 30 years old. And a lot of the younger ones were like, so you put light through that piece of cardboard and it had a picture?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. But we did a lot with that even back in the day with the slide projector, the sandbox, rear projection on sheets that had the fire department name on them, and we did a few drills where we actually pulled in the command bus, we call it bus, it was a pickup truck, and you ran command like you would for real, and you had the visual, and it was in the apparatus base, and it was very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
No smoke, no fire, but you were still using your visual cues that you do, and you're still using your decision making, your radio traffic. You were doing what you needed to do, and you can always add things of people coming up and talking to you, all of those scene distractors that you talk about in the situational awareness. You can add a lot of that to it and really make it realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a whole range of things. You're only bound by creativity more than you are by dollars. It's more of what your imagination can wreak havoc with, and I think you can do some really good things. But it really boils down to, when you're preparing these people to do the job, you got to put them in a realistic environment, be it a decision-making environment or doing the practical skills. The practical skills need to be done practically. You need to put away the projector, and you need to add that context of how the pieces and parts fit together, or they're not going to be ready for it when they hit the street.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I have that I've written about is ramping up the realism on training, and I used a term that I borrowed from Chief Todd Johnson in Woodbury, Minnesota, when I was down there working with them, and he said their theory is crawl, walk, run. And then I wrote an article about that on the blog if anybody wants to check that out, where he says, before we ramp up the realism, we got to make sure that people understand the basics of why they do what they do, and then gradually build in more realism. And the reason I want to throw this out for our discussion is as a caution to instructors not to make it too realistic too quick.
Right, definitely.
and you get a really skilled, creative, imaginative instructor. I can only see how they could create something that has tremendous fidelity and tremendous realism, but the class might not be ready for that level yet.
And the training chief was dead on. I mean, he had that perfect, absolutely spot on, where you need to get the physical skills first. The muscle memory of being tying knots, throwing ladders, pulling hose, even searches. I like to start off searches bright, clear, learn to do the crawling, learning to get around corners, learn about not hanging hose up on corners, doing the directed searches, doing the be it VES or whatever, you have to build on it. And when I say you got to have it in the right context, when you're done, you have to have it in the right context. But you're right, and the chief is right. You've got to go through the steps to get there. And if you skip any of those steps, it's just like going up the rungs of a ladder. If you miss one, you can get hurt.
Uh-huh.
And in this case, other folks can get hurt. So you don't want to do that. You have to go through all of the different steps to take that path to get there.
Now, you had said early on about, spending less time in the classroom, more time in the field, hands-on, realistic incident creations, incident simulations. The classroom part of it, though, for the new firefighter, learning why they're supposed to do what they do is pretty important, right?
Sure it is.
Yeah. Okay.
We do a hot wash at the end of our class, and the instructors are excused. I come in. I don't teach the class normally. I might come in and do a little thing, and the last group had a very good input, and I thought it was surprisingly insightful for the folks coming out of fire school. And they said, telling them and watching a PowerPoint of what they read the night before really didn't serve a whole lot. It wasn't real valuable. But if the instructors could tell them how they used that information, when they used that information, why it was important, and put it into the context of the whole thing, that's what they felt was so important. Be it the war stories, right. Applicable war stories, they felt that was the most valuable part. But they kind of described the PowerPoint as a snore fest.
Uh-huh.
It's just they're looking at the same pictures as they saw last night, or maybe hopefully even earlier, and they're reading the same bullet points.
Yeah.
And you need to, if the students can be trusted, which hopefully they certainly can be, to read the material, then you turn your lecture into more of a quiz, other means to back up that information, and then you get out and do it. But you got to make sure they have the basics. You can't have them locking up on you and forgetting which end of which on the ladder, or
mm-hmm.
just terminology that you got to have.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of ways you can do that to keep a class very lively and maybe briefer.
Yeah. Now, out there in the world, I know you've probably heard it. I know I have. Death by PowerPoint. There are instructors out there who feel like when they're teaching a curriculum, if there's 147 slides in the module, that they need to cover 147 slides in the module, or they're not doing their job as an instructor. Or maybe they use the PowerPoint as a crutch because they're not really fully prepared. Give some advice to these instructors about how to depend less on their PowerPoint, and how to take what would otherwise be a PowerPoint lesson and turn it into high fidelity, hands-on lessons. Because I'm not sure that every instructor that how to make that transition is intuitive. So what advice could you give for instructors about how to transition out of the classroom, turn off the projector, and start teaching high fidelity?
Well, there's an instructor that LSU brought in for the campus instructors, and we were invited. And the speaker has a book out called Teaching Naked, which is a truly creepy thought with a lot of our instructors, including myself. But it is taking back the classroom and using the electronics where they are truly suited for improving the program or the learning, and putting it away as a crutch and getting away from it as much as is humanly possible to go back to some of the more tried and true. I mean, we know rote memory is not a good way to do things. We know repeatedly writing down terms or whatever you're trying to remember, like Bart Simpson at the beginning of each show. No, not a good thing. So we're not talking about going back to that old school. We're talking about getting away from the electronics, and if we're talking terminology on a ladder, have the ladder in the room with you. Gather around it. one of the drills that I was telling some of our instructors at a meeting that I've done in the past is made up a bunch of index cards, 2 sets of them with the different terms. Divide the group up, hand them the pack of cards, and it's a relay. One person can go run up, put it down, they're running against each other. Correctly label it, run back, next person grabs the next label, runs up, puts it down, and you're going through, pawls, you go through the rungs, the beams, all the terms you've got, you just turn it into a little bit of a game. And I guarantee you there's instructors out there right now rolling their eyes. Oh, not in my classroom. No. But you got to keep it active.
But the more engaged the student, the more likely they are to enjoy the act of learning and remember things.
Exactly.
The instructor who thinks that showing pause and the heel and the rails on a PowerPoint is more it creates more enthusiasm than actually playing a game like that is fooling themselves. They might say, well, I'm not gonna they don't have to do that. I mean, there's no law or rule that says they have to do it. But you take 2 students, one who had to learn it on a PowerPoint and one who got to do it in the form of a game. I think the one who had to do it in the form of the game is going to be the more engaged, energetic, enthusiastic student, and arguably from neuroscience might be the one who would remember the lessons more when he or she was actively engaged in that type of exercise.
And you know what? It's going to show real quickly if they studied the night before and they read up on the material, if they were assigned it,
Right.
And there's a ton of different things you can do like that. And you don't want a classroom that has a ton of distractions, but you can drag goodies in as you need them.
Mm-hmm.
We all have sheets and salvage covers and things to cover it up, and we all know our classroom techniques of a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of making sure that they stay. Well, it's actually a lot of keeping them active and engaged, and there's just a ton of tricks out there that you can do.
Yeah, good. Now, we're going to be moving to close because you and I have to get on to the banquet, but I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the books and DVDs that you have. So refresh the listener on what are they called and what would they learn if they bought these and used them for their training.
Well, NFPA 1403 is a standard. It tells you the requirements. It tells you some things you can't do, things that you have to do. What it doesn't say is how to do any of it. And the Live Fire Training Principles and Practice book is actually an NFPA textbook. I mean, it's Jones and Bartlett published it, but it's an IAFC, ISFSI, and NFPA book. And all 3 agencies had, believe me, a lot to say about it. And this is the how-to guide. And it's coming out in the second printing here, second printing directly, and it'll be up to the new standard that changed, and we're updating all the information in there. The Jones Bartlett has a nice package that comes with it for instructors. It's got a ton of background materials. It's got PowerPoints, and it's a book used by the ISFSI for their live fire training, along with a number of states have adopted it, and it's the how-to. It tells you how to get from some of these standards that are pretty tough to really how to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
The DVD series, Chris Niebling and I have had a promotional testing firm for years, and very positive, never a legal challenge. I probably just ruined it by saying that. Jinxed right there. But we saw problems with candidates that they were relying on checklists, on interpersonal skills. We did assessment centers, not as much paper pencil. It was truly a better evaluation of how a person was ready, and a lot weren't ready, and you could tell. And you could tell these were people that would have problems in the street. And if you're teaching tactics, you go to YouTube and pull down a ton of fire videos, and you have a plethora of information that you can. What would you do if? And all these sort of things, and you can make a powerful class out of that. Try to do that for interpersonal skills. Probably not going to happen. So what we did is we developed initially 2 DVDs, and we have a third one that's going to be out hopefully next FDIC. Third one will be on volunteers primarily volunteer issues, but the first two were very quick vignettes. You had a little intro, you see a very quick vignette, and then you react as if you were the officer. You decide on your own how you would handle it. If you're teaching a class, this is great because you can get some really good discussions, arguments, debates going on how things should be handled. Then on the first two, we deferred to what we call the kitchen table debrief. We had Mike Galliano from Seattle, Mike Dugan from the FDNY, and several other officers from around the country, and they would discuss how they would do it. So first you figure out how you do it, then you get to see how they would do it, and then we just put up the bullet points from there. And it's great for officer development. It was not text specific. I mean, it's great if you're a little fire department, or you're a humongous fire department, if you're in a formal program, doing something on your own. The biggest market we're finding is test prep. People getting ready to go for assessment centers and such. Not the main intent, but it was one of the intents. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of states have adopted it. They're using it in Fire Officer 1. It really fits in nice for Fire Officer 1. Fire Officer 2, you can use the same scenarios, change it out a little bit to, okay, well, now you're the battalion chief over this. Now what are you going to do?
Where can they find these at?
Jones and Bartlett are on their website, and of course the fire engineering are on their site, or you can go to our site, which is ascendleadershipllc.com. There's another one's even easier, therightseat.us, and it'll defer you to the other site, and we have a bookstore on there, and you can pick up all of those from there, or from the original publishers, and several of the online bookstores are carrying them too.
Okay, and if someone was interested in using you as a consultant toward developing a testing process, is that stuff you're still doing there too?
Ascend Leadership still does that.
Okay.
And our contact info is on our website.
Okay, and I'll put a link in the show notes to the websites so that they can just click on them and be able to find you.
We support both of these with the right seat. There's more downloadable material online, how to use it, things like that. With the live fire, Susan Shaw, who was one of the other principal authors, and I, Mike Kemp was another one. We've traveled to a number of different states, helping get their programs going with ISFSI, and a couple times before ISFSI's program really got started. We helped Oregon, Colorado, and a few others before their credentialing program was started with ISFSI. Again, not a plug for ISFSI, but if your state doesn't have a credentialed program and you are using live fire training props, you need to be credentialed. Either check in with ISFSI or maybe go to one of the states that has a good program. But you need that backing, because a lot of it, I hate to say, a lot of it's not common sense. A lot of it is things that you have to look at how other people have done things, how things have gone right and how things have gone wrong, and learn from those.
That concludes our interview with Dave Casey, Director of the Louisiana State Fire and Emergency Training Institute. Thank you, Dave, for the gift of your time. Thank you also to the Louisiana State Firemen's Association for the opportunity to present a general session on flawed situational awareness, the stealth killer of firefighters. The conference was extremely well organized and very well attended, with more than 600 in my session on Saturday. I especially appreciated the standing ovation that I received at the end of the program and the very nice plaque that was given to me by President Kenny Huntz. So kudos to the Louisiana State Firemen's Association for the success of your great conference. Now let's take a question from the SA Matters community. This question comes from the Mental Management of Emergencies program that was delivered to the officers of the Plano, Texas Fire Department. Thank you to Chief Brian Crawford for the opportunity to spend 2 days with your officers over the course of a couple months. As an incident commander, when I arrived at the scene of an incident, what is the best way to keep me from being overwhelmed by all the incoming information? The overwhelm you speak of comes from two sources. First is the limited capacity of short-term memory. Second is what happens to short-term memory when an individual is under a lot of stress, like at emergency scenes. Research has robustly confirmed the capacity of short-term memory to be relatively small. The average person can take in, comprehend, remember, and recall about 7 pieces of unrelated information in short-term memory buffers. After that, you start forgetting. And the short-term memory mechanisms are not very good at prioritizing incoming information. So if you think you'll remember the most important things and forget the least important things, you may be in for a surprise and maybe a disappointment. What is remembered or forgotten is based on a variety of factors, including past familiarization with the information, association with other familiar things, repetition of incoming information, and emotional connections to the incoming information. As an incident commander, there are 2 tools that you may be able to use to help manage your memory: checklists and worksheets. Each serve a different purpose. Worksheets help you manage the memory of everything that you or others have already done. Worksheets document past events and current events as they turn into past events. In other words, documenting things as they happen. The memory of past events is called retrograde or retrospective memory. The checklist, contrary to the worksheet, helps you to manage the future, those things that have not yet occurred but are important to the success of the operations. Using a checklist, the commander can easily see what things have been done, already checked off the checklist, and what things have not been done because they're not checked off the checklist. This serves as a visual prompt to help the commander know what tasks need to be on the proverbial to-do list. The memory of future things to be done is called prospective memory. Writing things down protects you when your short-term memory becomes overloaded on arrival. And it will. It always helps to protect you when you forget important information. And you will. And it may be argued that time is of the essence, and there is no time to write things down. Listen, urgency and time compression only increase stress. And increasing stress reduces the capacity of short-term memory. If you were disturbed when I shared how small the capacity of short-term memory is, 7 pieces of unrelated information, you're not going to be very happy to learn that stress reduces that capacity from 7 to 5 pieces of unrelated information. Stress is not your friend when it comes to short-term memory. The more you're stressed, the more important it is to write things down. Now, I know there are people who will criticize and say that we have checklist commanders and people who don't know how to command because they're so used to only depending on the checklist. I'm not saying that you become completely dependent on the checklist. The checklist is a tool to help you manage your memory. You still have to command the incident, regardless of whether you have a checklist or you don't have a checklist. The checklist simply is a tool that you can look to and refer to and say, am I doing all the things that I'm supposed to be doing in the context of what is happening at that incident? Some things on the checklist won't get done at all, but hopefully your checklist at least includes the most critical things that you need to give consideration to when you're commanding the incident. The checklist will help you manage memory. Well, that's it. Episode 14 is complete. Thank you for sharing some of your valuable time with me today. I sincerely appreciate your support of the SA Matters mission. If you like the show, please go to iTunes and search for SA Matters Radio and subscribe to the podcast and leave your feedback and a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. You can also sign up for the free SA Matters monthly newsletter by visiting samatters.com and clicking on the red box on the right side of the homepage. Be safe out there, and may the peace of the Lord and strong situational awareness be with you always.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters radio show with Dr. Richard B. Gassaway. If you are interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit samatters.com. If you are interested in booking Dr. Gassaway for an upcoming event, visit his personal website at richgassaway.com.